Wait, we started?
Yep.
It just said starting, and now it's going.
All right. Our topic for our debate is service delivery for transition age youth and adults, and the debate is empowerment versus care. In order to live fulfilling lives as a contributing member of society, individuals with disabilities have the right to seek meaningful employment, engage in opportunities for higher education, and live in safe, supportive environments that respect their own autonomy. Unfortunately, many individuals with disabilities struggle in the transition to adult life as a result of the obstacles they face in the workplace, on college campuses, and in their living arrangements. Despite the value our society places on the pursuit of self-sufficiency and independence, they're not afforded the same opportunities as those without disabilities in determining their post-school choices and outcomes. Various stakeholders in the ongoing national conversation about transition services are divided along the lines of individual empowerment and integration into the greater community versus provision of more restrictive but specialized care services. Despite the high demand for appropriate services, there is limited formal research on best practices for providing them. In 2015, the Federal Partners in Transition Work Group estimated that prevalence of disability ranges anywhere from 5% to nearly 14% of the total population of transition age youth. This means that an unprecedented number of individuals with autism will transition out of this course in the next decade. Despite the incredible need for appropriate services, the current system is desperately ill-equipped to support individuals with disabilities as they enter adult life. Even research on this topic in a 2010 review of existing literature, a number of peer-reviewed articles on this topic is sparse and is hampered by limited sample sizes and restricted population ranges. Research that does exist covers a wide array of topics, yielding few solid conclusions in any given area. In this informal debate, we will present the often conflicting interests of various stakeholders involved in post-secondary employment, higher education opportunities, and living arrangements for adults with disabilities. We will provide a review of the existing research related to each of these three service arenas, but also draw upon national employment statistics, related stories in the press, and the experiences of notable stakeholders. We hope to bring the needs of individuals with disabilities at the forefront of our discussion while also acknowledging the very real concerns of potential employers, institutions of higher education, and families. With our debate, we hope to eliminate the complex concerns surrounding the issue of transition services and offer our suggestions for reconciling differences of opinion. Our rules for the day are: I am the introducer, Hannah. I'm from Indianapolis, and I'll be introducing each of our three topics of employment, higher education, and post-secondary living arrangements.
I'm Ariel King from Phoenix, Arizona, and I'll be summarizing the viewpoints of each of the stakeholders as our debate progresses.
I'm Samantha Favorite from Chicago, and I will share visuals related to the research and arguments presented throughout the debate.
I'm Haifa, and I'm from Gaithersburg, Maryland. I will be sharing research on the arguments presented by various stakeholders on both sides of each topic.
And I'm Mindy from Anderson, Indiana, and I'll be fielding questions at the end of the debate.
So we will begin by talking about employment. Employment, the beneficial as a means to support independent living and personal development post-high school. It presents unique challenges and risks for individuals with disabilities. Employers may argue that hiring individuals with disabilities presents more of a challenge than a benefit to their business or organization. As a result, employment statistics for individuals with disabilities often reflect high rates of unemployment or underemployment. However, vocational support providers and employees argue that adequate training and environmental modifications can significantly reduce workplace challenges. With their services, they aim to assuage employer fears and strike a balance between individual autonomy and necessary support.
Again, I'm Ariel, and I'll be briefly summarizing the employer perspective on employment of individuals with disabilities. As Hannah explained, employers may argue that individuals with disabilities often lack the skills necessary to succeed in the interview process, work productively, and self-regulate during difficult situations without displaying problem behaviors. As a result, employers may raise concerns that individuals with disabilities are ill-prepared to take on autonomous roles within their organizations. Employers in the general community typically have limited exposure to individuals with disabilities and inadequate training on how to appropriately support them as employees. I'll now hand off to Haifa, who will share some research on the difficulties that employers face.
Hi, so the first argument employers may make against hiring individuals with disabilities that doing so is difficult and places an undue burden on the company. Hendricks 2010 provided a review of evidence-based research related to employment. The review concluded that there are a wide range of obstacles to successful employment for individuals with ASD. Most relate to performance-based deficits that many employers might argue prevent them from hiring or retaining individuals with disabilities on their staff. Samantha will now share a chart summarizing these performance-based deficits.
All right. So in this chart, the concerns that employees may have in regards to hiring individuals with disabilities are clearly represented. Employers that are considered hiring a person with a disability may consider the potential employee's interactional difficulties, productivity, and the attitudes of others. Some examples of these skill deficits, as you can see, are underdeveloped professional skills, attention deficits, dual diagnoses, and inadequately trained support staff. Listed are a small sample of why employers may be hesitant to hire individuals with disabilities, or why care providers and families might advocate for care over autonomy.
So another difficulty that even employers who are open to the idea of hiring individuals with disabilities face is that the number of organizations with the expertise and willingness to hire, train, and retain individuals with disabilities is limited. In 2015, the Federal Partners in Transition Work Group called attention to the fact that in 2005, 57% of out-of-high school students with disabilities were employed compared to 66% of students in the general population. Furthermore, in 2005, young adults with disabilities earned an average of $10.40 per hour compared with $11.40 per hour for young adults in the general population. The obvious disparity in access to employment opportunities and assurance of fair wages could lead one to believe that many employers are openly against hiring individuals with disabilities. However, this is not necessarily the case. According to the Autism Speaks Family Services and Employment Think Tank 2012, employers often do not know how to redesign the workplace to support employees with autism. Unlike the trained professionals who support individuals with disabilities throughout their education, members of the general community have little knowledge of the types of accommodations and supports they could offer potential employees. As a result, even employers who would like to hire individuals with disabilities may struggle to follow through. This challenge is especially relevant to the discussion of employment for specifically individuals with autism spectrum disorders. Although some level of expertise is necessary to support any individual with a disability, the expertise required to support an individual with autism is even higher than that required to support individuals with other learning disabilities and physical disabilities. In 2011, Taylor and Seltzer conducted a study on 66 young adults with ASD who had recently finished high school. The authors found that there were low rate of employment amongst the participants. They also found that those who employed had meaningless jobs such as replacing dirty glasses with clean ones. In 2012, the Institute for Community Inclusion indicated that the majority of adults with autism are unemployed or underemployed. Furthermore, according to a 2015 report published by the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute and summarized by National Public Radio Health News, 20-somethings with autism were less likely to be employed than their peers with other disabilities, with 58% employed. In comparison, 74% of young people with intellectual disabilities, 95% with learning disabilities, and 91% with a speech impairment or emotional disturbance were employed in their early 20s. Clearly, the difficulty of employing individuals with autism surpasses even that of employing individuals with other disabilities. Samantha will now reiterate this point and other concerns of employers with several visuals.
All right, thank you. So the first visual I have comes from the National Longitudinal Transition Study. Here we can see a bar graph that illustrates the percentage of individuals with autism who never work or continue with their education after graduating high school. As we can see, a startling 66% of individuals with autism do not continue their education or work within 2 years of graduating. While the number decreases by approximately 20% every 2 years, this number indicates that employment and post-secondary options need to be addressed while individuals are still in high school to prepare them for life after school. Okay. The second figure comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. This data from 2012 clearly indicates that no matter the age, sex, or race of a person, the percent of individuals with a disability status who are employed is much lower than it is in people of the same sex, age, or race, but that do not have a disability status. A percentage of these individuals have developmental disabilities, but this figure still represents a truth about this particular population. Okay, and then here in our next visual, I have a figure that illustrates many different statistics about individuals with autism, and we'll actually be referring to this a few times during this debate. Right now, though, we will focus on the employment, which is the second icon. Only 58% of these individuals ever have a job that pays, while a mere 32% of people have a job soon after graduating from high school. This figure complements the first figure, which indicates that more support is needed for individuals to be employed within a few years of graduating.
Okay, I'll now be summarizing the perspective of employees and support providers that are helping individuals with disabilities to get jobs. Despite the many concerns of employers, support providers often serve as important advocates for individuals with disabilities. The support providers argue that individuals with disabilities have the potential to become valuable employees as long as employers receive adequate training and employees receive adequate long-term support. Furthermore, both employers and employees can benefit from environmental modifications that can increase the productivity and decrease problem behaviors. First, in a perfect system, vocational support should serve all individuals with disabilities by helping them select the right jobs, seek out training, and access long-term on-the-job coaching opportunities. I think that might have been Heidi's part.
Hendrick 2010 argued in support of increased employment opportunities for individuals with the ASD, proposing programs for long-term support and oversight during employment. Helping these individuals to obtain an appropriate job placement requires vocational support programs to consider their strengths, weaknesses, and specific interests. Hendrick 2010 proposes that with the help of these programs, individuals with ASD will be able to maintain long-term employment. Autism Speaks Employment Think Tank 2012 agreed with this assertion, but also stressed the need for vocational supports to be faded over time. The think tank argued that long-term help may be beneficial, but people with autism should receive direct instruction on how to manage and monitor their own behavior in order to avoid relying too heavily on job coaches in the long term. In order for individuals with disabilities to achieve the goal of self-management in the workplace, they should begin receiving vocational training as early as high school. High school transition plans need to include opportunities for learning the skills required to find and keep a job. Shaw, Wemon, and McDonough, 2012, assert that individuals with ASD should work while attending school because that can increase the chances of employment when they are adults. Therefore, high school should provide internship to individuals with ASD. Even with vocational training, workplace accommodations still may be necessary to allow individuals with disabilities to succeed. Taylor and Seltzer, 2012, argued that developmental disability services should focus on accommodating the needs of individuals with ASD without ID. Such services will allow these individuals to achieve high levels of autonomy and develop careers that are maintainable. Example workplace modifications include but are not limited to maps of important workplace locations, visual schedules, timers, written instructions, and checklists. Ultimately, individuals with disabilities have the potential to become valuable contributing employees. Speaking specifically to the potential of individuals with autism in a summary of the 2012 Autism Speaks Employment Think Tank, the organization aspired to shine a spotlight on the unique abilities, strength, and untapped resources of people with autism to potential employers, and inspire business leaders and our stakeholders to make this issue a personal priority as well as a national focus.
All right, so here I have another figure, and this one is going to provide us some information on vocational rehabilitation services. Vocational rehabilitation is a government-funded program that is essential in providing employment and training services for transitioning individuals with disabilities. This easy-to-follow guide explains the who, what, when, and whys of vocational rehabilitation, as well as how it is implemented. Vocational rehabilitation services are a result of the Rehabilitation Act, which indicates that individuals with significant mental or physical impairment are eligible to receive VR services to prepare them for finding, keeping, and maintaining employment. The specifics of VR services are established by the state, such as what age VR services begin. To receive VR services, the individual with the disability or their legal guardian must apply, often with the assistance of a counselor. If determined eligible, an individualized plan for employment is created to clearly specify what services are needed. Okay, and then I have another visual to complement this one. We can see some of the benefits of vocational rehabilitation. As you can see, VR has been provided to more and more individuals in the last 5 years, and the results of these services are great, but there's still room for improvement.
Although employers and vocational support providers and the employees they provide services for hold different primary objectives in the workplace, by working together, they can achieve the best possible outcomes for both businesses and individuals with disabilities. When supporting people with disabilities in the workplace, behavior analysts must consider Compliance Code 2.0 of the Behavior Analyst's Responsibility to Clients, which asserts that they have the responsibility to all parties affected by behavior analytic services. Behavior analysts can help to bridge the gap between employer concerns and the ongoing needs of employees with disabilities by providing the training and environmental modifications necessary to ensure that all parties feel adequately supported in the workplace. In doing so, they can also uphold the core ethical principle of respecting individual autonomy by supporting community involvement through gainful employment. Finally, by advocating for individuals who may not always be able to advocate for themselves in the workplace, behavior analysts can uphold the core principle of according dignity. As a group, we feel that in the workplace, the ideal situation for an individual with disability is one in which well-trained professionals provide an appropriate level of support while still ultimately preparing the individuals they serve for independence.
We will now discuss the perspectives of institutions of higher education and those of students with disabilities seeking a college education after high school. Like all recent graduates, many students with disabilities look forward to college as a time during which they can gain autonomy and enjoy new experiences. Secondary education can be very difficult for someone with a disability. Higher education requires independence, self-help skills, and flexibility. Laws governing the responsibilities of post-secondary institutions to accommodate for students with disabilities are far less strict than those governing elementary and secondary schools. As a result, many students take this important step towards individual autonomy to success. If given proper support and guidance, individuals with disabilities pursuing higher education can feel empowered and capable of achieving their post-secondary education goals. Ariel will now summarize the institutional perspective on supporting individuals with disabilities.
Although many post-secondary institutions do provide disability services, even those meeting their lawful requirements often fall short of truly ensuring social and academic success for all students. Elementary and secondary schools are held to a heavily legislated high standard when it comes to supporting individuals with disabilities. However, post-secondary education is seen as a privilege in the United States, not a right. Therefore, institutions may argue that individuals with disabilities seeking higher education should already possess the self-management skills to engage in their studies autonomously, given only the most necessary supports. I'll now hand off to Haifa, who will explain legislation and research related to the institutional perspective on post-secondary education for individuals with disabilities.
Relevant legislation directly reflects the argument that institutions of higher education are not responsible for ensuring that all individuals with disabilities can succeed in the rigorous, competitive college environment. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 protect elementary, secondary, and post-secondary students from discrimination. However, many of the provisions outlined in these legislations apply only to elementary and secondary schools. Post-secondary schools are not required by law to provide free and appropriate public education, FAPE, to individuals with disabilities, create individualized education plans, or provide transition services before graduation. According to the U.S. Department of Education, they are only required to provide appropriate academic adjustment as necessary to ensure that they do not discriminate on the basis of disability. In the post-secondary environment, responsibility for the success of an individual with a disability is placed primarily in the hands of the individual themselves. The college must only ensure that an individual does not face discrimination as a result of their disability. This means that legislation specifically protecting individuals with disabilities in a post-secondary environment focuses on access rather than support. For example, according to the U.S. Department of Education, if a post-secondary school provides housing to non-disabled students, it must provide comparable, convenient, and accessible housing to students with disabilities at the same cost. More broadly, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, institutions must physically modify their buildings and sidewalks to be accessible by adding accommodations like wheelchair ramps, elevators, and accessible bathrooms. Even laws addressing specific academic issues do not require colleges' support of or accommodate students with disabilities as individuals. Rather, they serve to ensure that the registration and testing processes are fair to all students. Again, according to the U.S. Department of Education, in providing an academic adjustment, a post-secondary school is not required to lower or substantially modify essential requirements. For example, although a school may be required to provide extended testing time, it is not required to change the substantive content of the test. Ariel will summarize the student perspectives on post-secondary education.
Unfortunately, for many students, the service cliff that they encounter upon entering higher education may result in academic failure. Though post-secondary schools may legally meet the basic requirements for disability services, the bare minimum sink or swim attitude of many institutions may lead individuals with disabilities to see post-secondary education as unattainable. The impossible barriers of unsupportive attitudes and limited funding for adequate services may even lead those who attempt college to failure. In order to succeed in college, many students argue that more institutional support is needed. Now back to Haifa, who will share research on the difficulties faced by individuals with disabilities in post-secondary schools and provide evidence for the argument that institutions have a responsibility to ensure the success of all students, including those with disabilities.
As Ariel explained, many students with disabilities struggle in the rigorous competitive college environment. A study conducted by Van Hees, Moisen, and Royce, 2015, examined 23 students ages 18 to 25 with ASD who attended a college or university in Belgium. Semi-structured interviews were conducted with the students. The authors found that these students have difficulties with meeting social and academic demands. They also have a hard time with sensory overload and time management. The students also found it difficult to determine their own boundaries and deal with problem-solving skills. A limitation to this study is that the participants were those who were willing to attend a scheduled meeting and discuss their experiences. Therefore, the sample may have only reflected those who had a good understanding of their own ASD. Notably, such students, even though they struggled, may still have fared better than their lower functioning peers. Another limitation to the study is that solely relied on self-report qualitative data. It would have been beneficial to examine the opinions and support needs of parents, providers, and other networks that support these individuals.
All right, so here we are back with this visual from before, but this time we are going to focus on education, which is at the very top in the green. As you can see, 36% of young adults with autism in a post-secondary educational facility after graduation, and 30% attended any college that was either a 2 or 4 year program. These numbers are relatively low and probably indicate that students with autism are not properly prepared for this transition during high school. It may also indicate that these individuals and their families do not know what options exist for them, or that colleges are not being accessible and reaching out to these families.
Despite the challenges they face, many individuals with disabilities are capable of high achievement given the right supports. Individuals with disabilities in a position to consider college may benefit from greater autonomy than their lower functioning peers. However, they still require some specialized attention on the part of the institution. Van Hees et al. 2015 proposed several recommendations for academic institutions. The authors recommended that students with ASD should be offered support when it comes to academic education, transition, student life, and daily living. Additionally, the authors also stressed the importance of student involvement in their own transition planning periods. Students are able to discuss what has worked for them in the past and how that can be implemented in higher education. Furthermore, a coach should meet regularly with the students in order to supervise the challenges and activities that they will face. This is recommended for both while transitioning to and in higher education institutions. Moreover, students with ASD should have access to adequate psychological support in order to overcome possible mental health issues. Lastly, Van Hees et al. 2015 suggests that awareness programs should be put into place in order to educate staff and students about ASD. In doing so, students with ASD are encouraged to be themselves if staff, other students, and coaches receive proper training.
All right, so here we have a chart that shows which colleges have been awarded federal aid toward transition programs for students with intellectual disabilities. I'm sure it's a little difficult to see, but you'll be able to see it on the Prezi attached as well. This list includes 26 different schools across the United States, as well as the representative for the TPSID programs and how to contact them. These schools were awarded 5-year federal grants to develop comprehensive programming for college students with cognitive disabilities, including ASD, enabling them to gain access to academic enrichment, social activities, employment training, and assistance in establishing an independent living environment. This list could be shared with families so that they know that their children do have the option to go to college and to have help transitioning.
Taking into consideration both the institutional perspective and the concerns of students, we feel as a group that post-secondary institutions could do more to support students with disabilities. Although we acknowledge that certain aspects of the caring, supportive environment cultivated in elementary and secondary schools are not translatable to the college environment, we still feel that institutions have a duty to ensure all students have the opportunity to succeed. As in the workplace, behavior analysts could play a key role in creating more disability-friendly college campuses. Acting in accordance with Compliance Code 2.03b, behavior analysts could support individual students in college settings by cooperating with other professionals in a manner that is consistent with the philosophical assumptions of behavior analysis in order to effectively and appropriately serve their clients. On a more systemic level, behavior analysts can also strive to act in accordance with 6.02, making information about behavior ideas available through presentations, discussions, and other media offered on college campuses. Finally, behavior analysts working alongside admissions teams, college professors, and institutional support staff might serve as a positive influence by purposefully centering conversations around the core ethical principle of benefiting others. By advocating for a student-centered mindset, behavior analysts may be able to shift the sink-or-swim attitudes of many institutions and also help ensure adequate funding for necessary programs to ensure individual success.
All right, and finally, we will be discussing independent living and care. The important, inevitable decision of post-school living arrangements can be a source of stress for individuals with disabilities and their families. The options for these individuals is limited based on their overall need. Based on the census information in the article by Enquist, Johnson & Johnson, there are roughly 7 million individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities living in the United States. Yet only about 25% of those individuals actually receive services through publicly funded programs. Living situations for people with ASD and other disabilities can range from living at home, living in a group home, or living independently. Regardless of the level of care that an individual receives, each of these living situations presents its own challenges. Living at home can especially become an issue because of the financial and emotional strain it places on the family.
I'll now summarize the perspective of care providers. Although it's easy to place blame on care providers for failing to provide the necessary services to families, it is important to remember that these providers must operate within the constraints of a limited system. Care providers must contend with high rates of staff turnover, funding shortfalls, waiting lists, and subjective assessments and standards of care, all of which dictate how they provide services as well as their ability to provide quality care for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Before discussing the shortfalls of the post-school care system in further detail, it is important to recognize the improvements that have been made to the system since the mid-20th century. During the years before World War I, institutionalization was the only option for those who needed placement outside the home environment. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 paved the way for community living, creating more options for these individuals and their families. Group homes, adult foster care, supported living services, as well as community protection programs are just a few of many options and services that are now provided in lieu of institutionalization. These services focus on person-centered planning and strive to promote the greatest independence with the least restrictive means. However, according to Enquist et al. 2012, one of the biggest challenges to these placement alternatives is the ability to find, train, and keep direct care staff. The wages of direct care staff are low. Many direct support professionals are seen as glorified housekeepers or babysitters, which make it very difficult to recruit individuals who are willing to stay for an extended time in the field. In addition, there's a lack of trained medical and behavior professionals available to deal with the needs of these individuals and the challenges behavior some will display. Other barriers include the local community objection to allowing individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to live in certain neighborhoods. A second major hurdle care providers must face is the difficulty of obtaining reliable state funding for the individuals interested in their services. State funding is constantly changing, leading to a volatile environment for the agencies providing services and trying to compete with other employers. Regulation and qualifying events, as well as assessments and evaluation, determine what services are available to the individual. A key factor in the reliability of these assessments is the consistency and the manner in which they are interpreted. Individuals who do not meet certain criteria based on the subjectivity of the testing may end up ineligible to receive the kind of services that in the long run could lead them to greater independence. Care providers could argue that even their best efforts cannot change biased funding assessment practices. On the whole, the process by which an individual is accepted into these services is lengthy and difficult to navigate. According to Enquist et al. 2012, this leads to increased frustration, not only on the part of the individual seeking services, but also the agency attempting to provide. Before we conclude our discussion of the care provider's perspective, it is again important to focus on the positive efforts many companies are making to better provide for those specific individuals in their care, in spite of the shortfalls of the overall system. Many states are adopting meaningful day activities, MDA, to support persons with developmental disabilities. According to Anguis et al. 2012, MDA exists to support the participation of persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities in activities and functions of community life that are desired and chosen by the individual. MDA includes purposeful and meaningful work, skill development, educational activities, and community inclusion activities that are directly linked to the vision, goals, and desired personal outcomes documenting in the individual's care plan.
Although care providers do have a strong argument that the often systemic problems are at the root of the agency and company shortcomings, pointing fingers does little to help alleviate the day-to-day strain that ultimately falls on individuals and their families. Often the burden of caring for an adult child with a disability leads to the physical exhaustion and emotional fatigue of parents. However, Seltzer and Krause 2001 point out that there are some families who report that the challenges have brought them closer and taught them to be more emotionally involved and supportive of one another. Thackeray and Ito 2014 spoke to mothers about the biggest challenge they face with carers providing services to their family member. One mother indicated that finding the right staff to work with their young adult was very difficult. Either way, the barriers inherent in the system and the attitudes of care providers make it difficult for families to advocate for their son or daughter in order to ensure the best possible path to independence. Overall, the best option for families is one in which the individual and his or her support system can continue to thrive.
I will open up the discussion for the family perspective on autonomy versus care for family members with disabilities by providing a breakdown of current statistics on living arrangements. We are referring back to a previously discussed figure, but this time we will be looking at the living arrangements. As you can see, 19% of young adults with autism live independently, while 31% have lived separate from their parents. Indicate that the majority of young adults with autism never move away from home, whether it be to their own place or to a group facility. As mentioned prior, this most common living arrangement can put a strain on the family. Indicates that more information about living arrangements needs to be shared with families, or that a stigma on group facilities may be preventing families from having their children move out.
One common concern of individuals with disabilities in adulthood and their families is access to adequate and appropriate health care. Bruder, Cairns, Mozzarella, Sims, and Stein, 2012, conducted a study that examined access to health care for adults with ASD. The authors surveyed primary care physicians in order to gain insights on the reason for physician visits, living arrangements, employment status, and any services that adults with ASD were receiving. The physicians reported that the majority of adults with ASD were living with family. As a result, these families faced stressors that could hinder the family's overall quality of life. Moreover, 54.7% of this population did not comprehend and follow the instructions of the physicians. As a result, caregivers needed to be actively involved in their care plan. Results from Bruder et al. 2012 study revealed that there is a need for supports when it comes to the families of individuals with ASD specifically. Healthcare is often only one worry on a long list of individual and family concerns. Despite a strong desire to seek independence, individuals with disabilities may struggle with the idea of living outside the home due to limitations in their self-help and social skills. Families would benefit from services that allow them to slowly prepare for increased independence while accounting for the needs of their son or daughter.
Assessing the positions of both care providers and families, we believe that, again, behavior analysts could play an important role in the betterment of an underdeveloped system. As we have discussed, care providers face legitimate barriers to the provision of adequate services as a result of low rates of staff retention and funding challenges. However, families face even greater challenge of striving to balance the needs of both their family member with a disability and the overall health of the family. Behavior analysts can serve both care providers and families by abiding by Ethics Code 2.09, which states that clients have a right to effective, research-based treatment that has been validated as having both long-term and short-term benefits to clients and society. Too often, post-school services become focused solely on care. However, learning should not end when a young adult leaves the classroom. Regardless of the environment in which they are living, individuals with disabilities should have ongoing opportunities to continue setting goals, working towards them, and gradually gaining greater independence. Programs focused on continued growth not only empower individuals with disabilities, but also reduce the strain on the system. As individuals gain more skills, they should require fewer services and thus place less of a strain on the system and their family. As highly qualified professionals using scientifically based principles, behavior analysts are uniquely qualified to dramatically impact the way the system approaches living arrangements for individuals with disabilities. Working alongside care providers and families, we can ensure that learning continues throughout an individual's lifetime. So to conclude our debate, I'll just review everything we've discussed so far. In this debate, we've discussed the many perspectives on the issues of transition services for individuals with disabilities. We focused our dialogue around three main questions that individuals with disabilities must consider with their families after leaving high school. First, is employment an option? And if so, how will I find a job? Second, should I consider higher education? And if so, what challenges should I prepare for? And third, where will I live and how much support do I need? In considering each of these important facets of modern adult life, we presented views of various stakeholders. We compared the concerns of employers with those of vocational support providers with disabilities, vocational support providers and employees with disabilities, and concluded that greater awareness of necessary accommodations, better training of employers, and services focused on eventual independence could help alleviate many of the challenges individuals with disabilities face in the workplace. Citing Compliance Code 2.0, we argued that behavior analysts can help to bridge the gap between employer concerns and the ongoing needs of employees with disabilities. Next, we progressed to an overview of the differences of institutional and student concerns on college campuses. Although institutions of higher education are less bound by legislation than elementary and secondary schools, we argue that they still have a duty to adequately support individuals with disabilities on their campuses. Again, we felt that behavior analysts could play a key role in uniting differing opinions of institutions and students by acting in accordance with Compliance Code 2.03b and 6.02. And here's where I fill in the last little section. It's like 4 sentences. It'll happen.
So what is the best scenario for transition to adulthood? We believe that the best scenario to adulthood is to strike a balance between autonomy and care. Families need to begin the transition process early, involve the individual in decision-making as much as possible, and be as flexible as possible in the transition. One example of this balance is at Rising Tide Car Wash in South Florida. The company's vision came out of the need to provide a family diagnosed with autism a meaningful life, including job and friends. Their primary mission is to employ individuals with autism and change the perception and attitude of their capabilities. They do this through intensive training of their employees and honing in on their strengths to ensure they are set up for success. Within this environment, Rising Tide Car Wash is giving these individuals the opportunities they need to become more independent and an active member of society. So this is where we would.
Can you guys see this YouTube video?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Could probably indicate somewhere here about.
Yay.
Uh-oh.
Change the view and it's freaking out now. Well,
My name is John Derry, and I'm the co-founder. And CEO of Rising Tide Car Wash.
Should we just pretend that we watched the whole thing and let it go for now?
Yeah.
probably.
Or I'm going to stop it.
Okay.